Okay, is this working? Well, it seems like it's casting. Okay, this is a test, but I'm leaving it in here for full posterity. I just need to align the projection a little. And okay, alright, there we go. I guess I should give a proper introduction. Thank you for bearing with me there. Hello and welcome. If you attune to this frequency by accident, then you've just shown up on the ground floor of a brand new Crystalcast. I am your humble host, Noah Blackroot, an archivist, curator, and collector of magical artifacts. I run a curio museum called Blackroot Archival in Seabridge, Rayesta. In running that business, I come across countless fascinating stories. Every antique, every curious object, every mysterious heirloom that I display at Blackroot Archival has an intriguing story behind it. And seeing how popular crystal balls are becoming nowadays, I thought I could share these stories with people who may be too far out to visit the shop, and simultaneously create some stunning visuals of my collection. If you like the stories you hear, then you always know you can come to Blackroot Archival in North Seabridge to hear more. Though I do need a snappier introduction for later casts, huh? It can't just be an advertisement every time. Okay, I'll work on it. But, with no further ado, for my first video, at a risk of sounding like a complete bore, I want to talk to you about a few rocks. Well, they're mainly bricks, but various rocks. These are my absolute favorite items in my collection. Not the rarest or most magical, or even magical at all in this case, but I always have them on display because I find them wonderful and validating from a creative standpoint. Stick with me and I'll explain why. This is a collection of 4 small marstone blocks of various designs. For your sanity, I'll call these blocks A through D in order of size. Block A is a small chunk of a Phrygian-style column. The Phrygian architectural style is known for its floral elements, and its branch weaving pattern appears on everything from bowls to hunting bows. Phrygian architects are regarded as especially impressive for this texture because even today they have no specialized tool for it. It's a point of pride per se for stonemasons in that culture to be able to do that winding branch pattern by hand. Clusters of rounded shapes interweave with individual sticks and twigs that you can follow around the design. That sentiment is also shared between disciplines, so sculptors and other mediums as well as painters will use that texture and are respected for replicating that pattern quickly and effortlessly. The more experienced the Phrygian artist, the closer that they tend to get to the traditional Phrygian ratio, which this sample is a beautiful example of. Block B is obviously a guidestone topper. Owls are used in most of Rayesta, but it's not really uncommon to see other birds, bears, wolves, the occasional fish. Fortuna owls like this one typically live in the far north, so in Rayesta these owls are sometimes depicted on the graves of northerners or people from colder climates, especially if the deceased didn't have a family or a tribe to return to, which was especially common during wartime or famine. However, this example certainly features a pre-war design. Most of you are probably looking at it thinking it's over the top or gaudy, which today it would be considered, but pre-war graves were often very extravagant. It wouldn't be terribly uncommon for the animal figure to be flanked by laurels, berries, or other floral designs. Nowadays it's usually just the animal's face or silhouette worked into the guidestone, with full figures reserved for more affluent families or individuals, which is a shame because I really like this practice. Block C is a fluted brick similar to the ones that would have been used in Middle-era gray brine military structures. Like most of Rayestan military buildings at the time, function triumphed almost completely over form, and most state-use buildings in Rayesta were just built from thousands and thousands of these identical fluted bricks. The masons would use a device called a rocking sander to make these shafts in the rock. The stone would be placed below the sander with a worker on either side, and they would rock it back and forth until the flutes in the stone were deep enough. Then they would pile it up and ship it off to be used for barracks or fortresses, whatever the military needed at the time. Now, I don't mean to glorify the practice, because in this case it was mostly slaves and lower class laborers being exploited to make these stones, but some respect must be paid to their back-breaking work. Hundreds of years later, there are still structures in every Rayestan city that feature their handiwork. And for the final piece, Block D, without a doubt, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. This looks like an ordinary brick from pretty much any angle. But, okay, let me just get right to it. This is a sculpture of a hand, a regular humanoid hand. On the underside of this block, there is an opening, and inside the opening is a relief sculpture of what I could only assume is a hand, or maybe the artist's hand. You might be familiar with this art form if you've ever been to Atanse or seen an Atanse elf doing ice sculptures during the winter. It's called an empty sculpt. They have tools and techniques to carve up the inside of an ice block to create gorgeous works of art. And they're fully made with negative space hewn away inside the ice while they look through the ice from the outside. Now, this example is made of marstone, and I don't care where you're from, if you've seen stone, you know it's not translucent. It's very difficult to display this item in my museum because it's not anything more exciting than a perfectly squared off brick with a hole in the bottom. During the time this was probably sculpted, earth-shaping magic had not really been developed to the point that we understand it today. So, however they did it, the artist chiseled this empty sculpt blind. And you can feel the chisel marks on the inside with your fingertips, which I don't allow in my museum, unfortunately, because repeated touch would wear away the sculpture. You understand. However, with modern metallurgy techniques and expertly performed earth-shaping magic by my friend Makora from Mudfish Metallurgy, shout out to Mudfish Metallurgy, another local Seabridge business, we used this brick as a mold to cast a sculpture of the hand inside the block, which Makora then removed afterward without breaking the brick. Thank you very much. I display the mold and the cast that we made side by side so people can see the detail that this artist was able to put into their work without the techniques that we have today. It's extremely impressive. I can't even put it into words. And side note, look at this star, this little thing here. How did they make this? How did they make this with... Okay. Which brings me to my conclusion. If you're still listening, you might be wondering why, in a museum full of magical, haunted, or cursed, or blessed items, these fully non-magical sculptures are my favorite pieces. Well, I travel every few months to go to markets and sales around the eastern seafront to buy things for the museum, and I guess to network with other collectors. I never really have an egregious amount of money, I'm not a high roller or anything like that, but it's still fun to find modest antiques and artifacts with cool stories behind them. And I got these in an auction for entirely too small a price tag. When they said they found these in Seabridge, as a bit of a hometown boy, I was completely sold from the get-go. But as a scholar of art, that just confused me. These were completely disparate items from multiple different countries and eras, but all these sculptures were found together, wrapped and buried in a collapsed cellar underneath the ruin of a pre-war storehouse here in Seabridge. I can imagine, in the chaos of the two-handed war, a lot of buildings that didn't have much use to the occupying parties were just forgotten or buried in rubble. This culture-spanning collection of art was just sitting there for hundreds of years in that cellar. But like I mentioned at the start, these are marstone blocks. If it wasn't already obvious, Tansi ice sculptures are not typically done in marstone, and they don't really have marstone in Phrygia for their columns. Guide stones with big, fully sculpted Fortuna owls like this, and these mass-produced military bricks are a copper a dozen nowadays. You can find them anywhere. What made these special and worth burying? Well, I admit the rest of this is just my scholarly opinion. Speculation, if you will. But I like to imagine that before and during the Two-Handed War, there must have lived a sculptor here in Seabridge, when it was barely a village, that made these four sculptures. This was not a collection of art, like they sold it as. This was practice. These were the fruits of artistic discipline from one person living in a backwater seaside town. They spent their spare time recreating art and architecture from places that they would only be able to experience through books and merchants' word of mouth. This was a person who loved their craft and loved culture and engineering and aesthetics so much that they would blindly chip away at the inside of whatever material they had at their disposal if ice wasn't readily available. A person who, at some point, lovingly wrapped their favorite works up and hid them in a cellar, fleeing their home at the threat of an encroaching war. As any artist knows, for every beautiful artistic success like these, there are 1,000 failed attempts that are lost to time. 1,000 mistakes and 1,000 frustrating moments where you fail to capture what's in your head into the clay or on the parchment. I find myself bothered that nebularism as a religion doesn't have a saint of the arts in its pantheon. So, if we ever choose one, I elect this artist. You may have died hundreds of years ago, but this, the first Crystalcast in the Blackroot Archival series goes out to you. I remember you and your work. Thank you to everyone who may be watching this introductory episode. Feel free to write me with your thoughts and tune into this frequency at the same time next Friday if you liked the presentation. Hopefully I did the spell right and this actually casted. I'll find out. Either way, this has been Noah Blackroot from Blackroot Archival. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again next week.